I wish someone had said to me very clearly at the beginning, there probably is no one right way to do it. Number two, don't spend so much time trying to get it to be perfect before you go out with it. There are so many decisions that you have to make as, an entrepreneur. Like, how do you want to structure your company? What's the business model? How do you define the market? I now tell people, like, get it to a place where like you feel like you can answer questions, but like then just go out and start pitching it to people, and you will learn from those no's, more than you can learn just sitting there like working on your deck and working on your business model.
We had a great conversation with Cindi Leive. She was the longtime editor at Glamour, a fashion magazine. And what's interesting about her is at the top of her game, she decided to try something different. She left the corporate world at Condé Nast and started a collective, her own entrepreneurial venture. And what's interesting about that is that it's really messy, but messy in a different way than the corporate world. And so she talks about what she learned about collaborating, about working with the younger generation in a much smaller environment with limited resources, something I can tell you I know about. So you're going to want to listen to Cindi and hear her story and her tips. So Cindi, I can't thank you enough for coming on the podcast. As you know, this podcast is called The Messy Parts. And so we're going to dig right in.
I'll just spill my coffee right down the front of my blouse.
Well, that's a good place to start. Yeah. So we're going to be authentic about the whole thing.
I'm into it.
You have had a storied career already, and forget the chapters that are yet to come, but you wanted to be a journalist from when you were 8 or 10, and then you had this incredible path, Glamour, Self, and now Meteor.
Yeah.
There had to have been messy parts, right? It wasn't just
God, I feel like the whole thing is mess.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Because it looks pretty perfect.
Smoke and mirrors. No, I feel like it's sort of all mess. But sorry, I interrupted you. You were having a question.
I actually think so if I think about it, you started a magazine in your neighborhood, then you went to college, Paris Review, great brands, Condé. Like, was there messy parts in that journey that seemed like a hockey stick to the right?
Oh, totally. I mean, first of all, like, I don't think I actually knew what a job in magazines was. I knew that I loved magazines. And so, you referenced 17, like this is so dorky, but when I was little, I had a subscription to 17, I was probably like, 12 or whatever. I would literally run down the street to my mailbox on the day that I knew it was going to come, because it was like this lifeline to the world outside of my Virginia town. And I can still remember exactly like what some of those layouts were like. And, but I didn't understand that there were people who had jobs like making that thing happen, because this was like before, reality TV, the internet, blah, blah, blah. Like, I just had no clue. There were names on a masthead, but I didn't know what they did. And so it was only like when I was in college that I actually started to understand what some of those jobs might be. But I thought I was going to go back to school and get a PhD in English Lit, because I had a professor who I really admired who had said that I should do that. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll do that. And when I started working, it was just going to be like, oh, I'll do this for a year, and then I'll go do the important work of my life.
Your mom was a scientist. Did you ever think about going into STEM?
Oh my God, no. I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, because she's
that was a very strong reaction.
She was an incredible role model to me. But no, she would come home from work and she would be talking excitedly about like lipopolysaccharides and what happened in the centrifuge that day.
I like that you even know that
cell
word.
Membranes. I know how to spell it because I was like English major girl, but no idea really what they were, and I assume still are. Anyway, but the thing that I picked up on from that was not like STEM is the thing, but it's just really good to have like something that you are so excited about to do all day that you want to come home and talk about it over the dinner table. And so that kind of like just passion for finding something to do that you can actually get paid for doing, that like lights you up like that was the part that kind of stuck.
Something that was like in your household or in the water somehow for you.
Yeah, I think just like a love of work. And I later kind of came to understand how much my mom had probably sacrificed, like because she was raising me as a mostly single mom. And, she was working as a woman at the NIH in, microbiology, and was one of the few women there, and nobody really had kids. And so for her trying to do this balance, like to work all day in this consuming role and still be back she was home at 6 or 6:30 to, make dinner for me every night. Like that was a lot. And I think there were probably a lot of promotions and growth and, awards and honors that she gave up so that she could do that. But I didn't really see any of that growing up. It was that I sort of learned as an adult.
I was going to ask you about that. So you talk about having a single mom and she was juggling all these things, as all moms do.
Yeah.
But you don't mention the messy parts of that really. Because for you, it was almost like it wasn't on display.
I didn't really see the mess there. I didn't. I mean, it's partly because as a kid, you're incredibly self-centered. So you're just like, what does this mean for me? And I didn't really have that distance. Now, as an adult, I mean, my mom died when I was 19, so I haven't had that benefit that I think a lot of adult women have when they start doing the juggling themselves,
right,
of saying to their moms, if their moms worked, wait, what, how did you do this? And what was messy? And, what balls were you dropping? And help generally. I haven't had those conversations with her, but from talking to her friends, I know that there was mess, but she also was very, what's the right word? She was incredibly forthright and, just straightforward and not given to really thinking about, I don't want to say she wasn't thinking about her interior life, but she was just here's a challenge. I'm going to go solve it. She was incredibly cheerful. She was very math and science oriented. So I think she just saw everything as a problem that could be solved.
You're curious and optimistic. And I think one of the things that you say is that you don't look at the past, you look forward. And in some ways, as you're describing your mom, you're kind of describing her.
Yeah, I think I aspire to that. A lot of people have wrestled with various forms of insecurity, whether you call that imposter syndrome, whether you call that just sort of the lack of confidence that so many of us have to get over. And I never saw that in my mom. So I definitely aspire to that. She may have been quaking in her shoes under it all, but I never saw that. And I think she just had a lot of faith in her abilities.
Or she was really good at compartmentalizing.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's a skill.
I mean, I'm pretty good at compartmentalizing. I think that's how I get through the messy parts. But
yeah.
We sort of have to pause, right? Because you lost your mom at 19. That's a pivotal, rather messy thing.
It is messy,
right? I lost my dad. I think I was 17 or 18.
Yeah.
I mean, those are seminal things.
Totally. I mean, do you feel like that had just this sort of thumbprint effect on your life?
I mean, it had to have,
Yeah.
right? But I was so good at compartmentalizing that I was able to sort of shove it aside.
Yeah.
But I definitely think it had to, right? But I think you, I'm really focused on okay, what's the problem I'm solving? What's instead of seeing it as an obstacle, it's like an obstacle course. So then I'm just moving through.
Right.
In some ways, the moving through allows you not to process all of that. I mean, I remember being in college and them sending me to a therapist and my thinking what's happening here?
Totally. I remember there was this, now I realize in retrospect, very nice woman who I went to college with, who, when she heard that my mom had died, started inviting me to this grief group that I guess students who had lost their parents were holding. And I was like, no.
Right,
I mean,
right.
I literally, if I saw her coming on a path at my very small college campus, I would turn away so I didn't have to walk past her. I'd like to apologize to her right now, because that is a very evolved thing that I should have done. But at the time I was I'm just moving forward. I'm going to get the jobs. I'm going to get the grades. That's how I'm coping.
That is a thing.
Oh, it's a total thing.
Because I remember I went one session. I mean, therapy wasn't a thing in my childhood growing up. I went to one session and she said, when you're ready to talk about it, come back. There's no point in you coming back otherwise. And I was like, great.
Yeah.
Move on.
Right.
Next problem to solve.
I'm solved. I'm healthy. I have no grief.
But we're not going to be talking about this.
No, I mean, it took me a long time to realize that one of the things that losing my mom early had kind of trained me to do was be rigorously self-sufficient, which is not a wholly bad thing, but definitely not a wholly good thing either. I remember just a couple of stories that kind of crystallized this for me. I would try to pay for everything myself. My mom was 19 when I died. There were plenty of people who wanted to treat me to things, take me to things, help me out with things. And I was I got this. And I remember going to dinner with a friend and her family and her father for like a family occasion. They had invited me along. And at the end of the meal, I took this like crumpled, sweaty $10 bill out of my pocket and tried to pay her father with it. And I was like, Dr. Berman, can I pay my way? And, this guy's like a dentist.
What's happening?
Yeah. He's like, no, I'm good. And I just thought, okay. I didn't realize at the time that like, I could allow people to like help me or support me or take care of me.
So you worked at Condé. We all have watched Devil Wears Prada. I think they're remaking that. I'm not sure. But, that had to have been a tough place to work. And in some ways, as you're describing sort of your resilience that you sort of were forced to develop, and maybe it's also genetic, I don't know. We can have a nurture-nature conversation. Maybe that helped you in an environment like that.
I think it did. Like, I mean, first of all, like I said, being self-sufficient and being independent, which I was probably predisposed to anyway as like a Gen X kid. I was like, give me the house keys and I can do everything else. I was proud of being independent. That gives you the ability to like get things done. I was, I felt like I went into the work world relatively, despite those comments about imposter syndrome, which I definitely felt at various points along the way, I was like pretty confident and pretty determined also to like, if I didn't know how to do something, to figure out how to get it done. And I also think like that world of magazines at the time, for better and sometimes for worse, really encouraged you to like do it yourself, don't collaborate with other people. It wasn't like a team environment where I think we now think of workplaces.
It was very like, command and control.
He was very command and control. And I remember one of my bosses, CEO at the time, had said to me, I think the most important two words that an editor-in-chief can say are, I think, meaning like, I think we should do this. I think we should do that. Like, I know my opinion and that's how we're going to go. And that was sort of like what the image of an editor-in-chief was. And so, I didn't become an editor-in-chief until like farther along in my career, but I do think that sense of like, I'm going to get
owning your voice really strongly.
Owning your voice and kind of like believing in your own personal vision and getting it done. Like that was something that I think I was sort of like inclined to. And of course there is a like not good side to that, which is that to get anything done well and to enjoy work and to learn, because you don't know everything, you have to be willing to ask for advice.
Okay, this is so interesting. So you have a storied career at Glamour. Well, really at Condé, because you do Glamour, then you go Turnaround Self, which, turnaround is no small thing. And then you go back and sort of, reign Glamour, with incredible success and doing things like Woman of the Year, which I definitely want to dig into. But then you leave. What made you leave? Because you clearly loved that job.
I had been there so long and the business had changed so much. And, like anybody, I had to let a lot of people go. And that's like really hard.
Wait, about what year was this?
I left at the beginning of 2018, and
so the media business
had really changed, and also it was time, and it was time for someone else to do the job, and it was time for me to do something else.
We all know that people stay in jobs, as we've learned, particularly these last few years, until they keel over. So you didn't do that. I'm not commenting on anything. I'm just saying it's very hard for people in power to pass the baton.
Yeah,
but you are describing a situation where you did that.
Well, I think I also felt that there was a lot going on in the world that was going in a direction that I wanted to be part of, right? So this is like, 2017 was like the first year of Trump's first presidency. It was the Women's March. It was Me Too. And I think so many women were like waking up to this idea that like, oh, we really have to like raise our voices and make change. Like the world is just not going to automatically evolve. We have to make it evolve. And so there was this sort of like rise of activism. And I don't think I knew exactly what I wanted to do to be part of that. But like,
did you consider yourself an activist already?
I didn't consider myself an activist. I still don't consider myself an activist. I consider myself like, a media person, a storyteller, a journalist. Like, there are people who are actually doing the work, and that is, and that is great. But I wanted to be part of that. And that was not what Glamour was like put on this earth for, or what the business model was. It's a fashion and beauty magazine, and you have to do right by those subjects.
When you were at Condé, the model of leadership was command and control, which I totally agree. That was definitely a thing. And then you pivoted to do something on your own. Mm-hmm. I want to know what made you decide to do that. And then what's interesting is you always said it was a collective, which is kind of the antithesis of command and control.
Yeah. I mean, I think even though, yes, like the model at Condé Nast was command and control, I think I learned over the years, as probably most of us did, that like your best working experiences are when you're collaborating, whether it's with your team or even with like someone from another magazine or another brand. It's just like much more rewarding to be able to like spitball with someone, work it out with somebody, and, find somebody who's going to have like a way better idea than you could ever have. Like that's where the fun happens. Mm-hmm. It doesn't happen in you like just being, like blinders on and doing your thing. And so I think I was excited to do something where I was just in active collaboration with other people a lot, and particularly with people who are like younger than me, who come from like different parts of the world of journalism or magazines than I do. And also like our subject at the Meteor is
so tell us what the Meteor is. Because again,
we're a media company focused on issues that affect women, girls, non-binary people in this country. So, we're a feminist outlet. We publish podcasts, newsletters, a lot of social video. We do a lot of live events because we find that like our audience, and I think just people in general, really want to be together physically right now. And then we also do like partnerships with brands and larger organizations.
So you're listed as a co-founder, right? I'm sort of interested in this idea of the collective.
Yeah. So it started with a group of us, probably, initially about 12 or 15. We had our first ideas meeting in Gloria Steinem's living room, which
Why?
is, well, because that's a great question. Why? I had known Gloria for years. She was a contributing editor to Glamour in the 1960s, which I will say it in case it's not obvious. I was not there then. But I gotten to know her during my time at Glamour because of that history. And I had been like an avid reader of Ms. It was the only magazine that my mom got other than Scientific American, which, as we've established, was like not my jam, baby. And so, but I loved Ms. And so I'd always kept in touch with Gloria, and this conversation had started between me and other members of the collective about how we were seeing this rise in like activism among women and political engagement among women, but there wasn't really a sort of home for storytelling in the way that like Ms. had been, back in the 1970s and, still continues. I mean, it continues to publish today and is doing great work, but what would speak to this sort of movement that we were starting to see. And, Gloria was like, come over, have a meeting
As
here.
One does. Gloria says, come over.
I love it. She loves an editorial ideas meeting. So there were a group of about 15 of us, and, we went over and we brainstormed, and then we had a bunch of other meetings, none in as quite a fabulous a place as her living room. And, but she had been like, this is where we made Ms. Magazine back in the 1970s. What does that look like today?
That's a pretty storied moment.
Yeah. And so, there were a lot of discussions, and then there were a lot of pivots because COVID started, and we had thought we were going to start with like a whole kind of live event series, and then very quickly pivoted to doing podcasts and some virtual events. And that kind of taught us like, oh, okay, there's
we
like
can do
space
that.
for this. Yeah.
So it's interesting as I listened to our own conversation, we both have had roles that were in the corporate world where, it comes with structure and resources. And even if you're a change maker, which we definitely share, it's different doing your own thing, right? Mm-hmm. And so as I listen, I think like, oh, it just sounds so easy. Well, I gathered people in Gloria Steinem's house, and then we did this thing. We were so good at pivoting. But the truth is, starting your own business, even me, like trying this podcast thing, it's messy, and you're actually quite vulnerable and hanging out there by yourself in some ways, even if you have a team.
Totally. Yes. I mean, I think, in a way that like doing a project is easier. And at that point, it was a project. Then when it becomes a business and you're like, oh, now I understand when people say that like being an entrepreneur is like not at all glamorous. Like it is truly not at all glamorous. Like, it's you waking up at like 2:30 in the morning being like, shit, did I forget to renew our, E&O insurance?
I woke up at 2 and said, wait, did I give Cindi the right address for today?
But you did, and I'm here. But no,
we weren't
literally.
Sure.
Also, in case our lawyers are listening, I did renew the E&O insurance.
Exactly.
Okay. But there have been plenty of balls like that I've dropped. And, even if you have a team, and we have a great, albeit small team, it is still like on me to
not like
think
the size of the team that you had at Condé.
No, definitely,
Exactly.
definitely not. And, there's really good parts of that, which is that like, if you are anyone in our organization, whether, you're an assistant or you're like one of the senior leaders, I know I'm making it sound like it's 100 people, it's like,
how many people are there?
There are 6 full-time staff members, and then we have a number of other people who work with us on other.
That's a major difference. Okay, keep going.
It is a huge difference. But like that flat organization where I know any entry level job, they always tell you like, you can contribute on any level. We're going to hear your ideas. But like in a big organization, that's really hard. There. Yeah. Truly, like you will be part of every decision we have to make, from like the boring ones to the, to the exciting sort of editorial things.
What surprised you? Like raising money? Like what were the parts that were hard?
Raising money is incredibly hard, partly because raising money is just hard, and partly because like overcoming that thing of like, I have to be perfect before I can go out there and ask people for money is something that you have to get rid of. One memory I had that I kept coming back to is my husband spent years as an independent film producer. And I remember when he was producing his first film, which was like, this was like very early in his career, like no real track record in those early days, like calling friends to try to get them to invest and be like, hey, I'm doing this movie. We think it's going to be great. This is like the era of independent film in the 90s. Like, are you interested in, coming into this? I can send you information. Like maybe you want to, chip in, whether it's like 25,000,
so
50,000, 100,000. He was just doing the ask like it was no big deal, And I would be like, how can you just ask people for money like that? And he'd be like, well, they can say no. And lots of people do say no. And I did come back to that memory a lot when I had to go out and raise funds for the company, which is different from obviously during my years at Condé Nast. I'd done a lot of pitching. You're always pitching, right? You're trying to persuade an advertiser. You're trying to, explain to a celebrity why they should do your cover and not someone else's, So it wasn't that, but that's different because that's not just you. You're pitching like this is big thing.
Much more vulnerable thing to try.
I wish someone had said to me very clearly at the beginning is, first of all, there probably is no one right way to do it. So number 2, don't spend so much time trying to get it to be perfect before you go out with it. Like I remember, first of all, there are so many decisions that you have to make as, an entrepreneur. Like, how do you want to structure your company? What's the business model? How do you define the market? All of those things. And like, partly because I come from, a career in journalism, I really wanted to get it right. And partly because like I'm a habitual perfectionist, like, so many, I feel like I'm probably sitting
so
here
many
with
other
one.
type A people, like me.
Yeah. And, that perfectionism had largely like served me well in my career. So I kind of felt like I want this to be like totally buttoned up and like she's made every right choice and she's got the exact right people with her. And like, you can just keep tinkering like that forever. And I wish that like, I now tell people like, get it to a place where like you feel like you can answer questions, but like then just go out and start pitching it to people and you will learn from those no's, more than you can learn just sitting there like working on your deck and working on your business model.
So I want to pivot to sort of the conversation about the time that we're in, right? So you leaned into something. It was a moment of time in 2017, 2018. Now we're fully in. And the thing that the Meteor is very focused on, storytelling and journalism, but kind of this notion of feminism is under attack.
Yeah.
Right? And so how do you, and I mean, clearly you're very good at looking at obstacles and making them into obstacle courses. Like you're very resilient.
Oh, I love that phrase.
It's
never
my
heard
TED
that.
Talk.
Oh, sorry. I have watched your TED Talk.
Well, now you're going to definitely go watch it.
Miriam's TED Talk.
We're going to watch the TED Talk.
Yeah.
No, but somebody told me that that's how I behaved. I didn't actually come up with it myself, interestingly. My neighbor, Nathaniel.
Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting is that the thing that you're now focused on is under attack. And you're pretty resilient. We've definitely observed this here. But not everybody is resilient. So how do you remain hopeful? What do you worry about for other people? Because it's kind of a difficult time for people who are in that lane.
It's incredibly difficult. And I mean, I think first of all, like, I would never sugarcoat it. I mean, it's really when you take a step back and look at where we are, I talked about my mom. I grew up with this understanding that like science was sort of a truth, like it was sort of her religion. And to see now what's happening at the NIH, to see what's happening to just our basic concepts of, respecting accuracy, respecting health information, respecting science kind of tossed by the wayside. It's incredibly unmooring. Like it's not just an obstacle. It's something that, makes you feel like you've taken a step. When you're on a staircase and you said the step that you thought was there is not there. It is that kind of a feeling. And so I think that's real and I feel it.
But if somebody's depressed or feeling anxious or, wants to curl up like a ball, like what's the lesson that we can pass on to them?
First of all, that is rational, and I would never say to people like, don't be depressed, get over your depression, get out there and do something. Like
we know that doesn't work.
We know that doesn't work, but it's also like a totally, I think it's a totally normal human impulse to be depressed. I think, first of all, focusing on the world that you inhabit personally, like your community, your workplace, what are you doing within your family, if you have people in your family that feel differently, like what are you doing within the world where you are a protagonist to change things? I think that's where you can also start to feel like real successes.
I think about this because, it can seem insurmountable.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that if you focus on a hyper-local level, and by the way, you don't have to try to make enormous changes. You can start by making small changes, even just getting to know your neighbors. I think part of what's happening is that there's just a lack of understanding and empathy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are broken. It's not like one side is right and one side is wrong.
Right.
But rediscovering our humanity starts close by.
Yeah. And that's where you also you realize, there probably are things that I agree with these people on in some fashion. And I'm not doing that thing of it's on Democrats to reach across the aisle because it's on everybody to try to work together. But I think just trying to have personal conversations rather than thinking of everything on this great big political stage is important. And also just try to remind yourself that there are a lot of people that feel like you do. And I'm sure for anyone listening to this, there is a group in your community, there's a group in your workplace, there's a group at your, at your school. There are people who are working on something that matters and you can find them and be with them because it's not like the entire world has decided that, it hates these values that have, that are part of.
Pick anything. You can join the garden club. Just getting that sense of agency back, I think, can help.
I also think just being with people physically is incredibly important. I think we're at this moment also where because of the rise of AI, where you really can do so many things just by yourself, right? Even, I don't know if you've experimented with any of these.
I have. It really is astounding.
If you've used the notebook tool.
I used Notebook LM yesterday. I literally called 4 people and was like, you have to listen to this.
Yeah. Did you make the podcast?
No, but I did. I actually took the note. Okay. So this is so interesting. I took the notes for the conversation that we're having and I dropped it in because I was doing something else. So I just wanted it to play it audio for me. Yeah. But it went so much beyond that. It made it into a podcast.
Yeah. The 2 people talking to each other.
As if it was a real person.
Completely. Now talking to you, I find myself, I'm like, oh my God, I sound like that Notebook audio person.
So it's such
Maryam,
a crazy
and you
thing.
know what else is interesting? They have this pattern down. Anyway, for those of you who don't know, who are listening to this and don't know.
LM.
Yeah. And basically there's a tool now that will take whatever document you've fed into it, whether that is something found on the internet or your own document that you've uploaded, it will make it into a podcast incredibly quickly. And my point is that I think that the rise of AI is going to exponentially increase this trend that already exists, which is people just being kind of alone with their phones or alone with their computers. I mean, the number one, I have not fact checked this, but was recently said to me by a reputable source that the top thing that people are using AI for right now is relationships, loneliness, human connection.
I had to interview 3 of the top women in AI a couple of years ago at Fortune. I was like, why am I the one doing the interview? Because I had to study like I was in college because, I was in a panic. And And what was amazing is I discovered a podcast where a guy had studied for 2 years people who used AI as companions.
Yeah.
This was 3 years ago. And literally people say, well, at least the Siri asked me how I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a thing.
Oh no, it's like, and therapy that way, people roll their eyes at it, but apparently like there are some good results. Anyway, whether or not that's good or bad, one, I think, alarming thing that is likely to come for it is that it is going to create a sort of like silo of one where each one of us can do so many things, just with the AI tools at our disposal. And I think that makes being together with other people like really important medicine that we have to make sure we're giving ourselves, because like I do think there's something that happens when you are physically with someone else that does not happen when you are, just alone with AI that's been trained to please you, as we recently saw ChatGPT was so good at doing.
So you're a mom, because this is an interesting thing. I think about this a lot, right? So for circumstantial reasons, for genetic reasons, I don't know, we're both obviously quite resilient and we look forward. We have kids. It's hard to teach your kids that resilience.
Yeah.
And we are now having kids launch into a much more complicated world, as you're describing with the loneliness epidemic and sort of all the division that exists. What's the lessons that we can try to pass on? I say my kids never listen to me anyway, but maybe our, people who are listening will take it away from us because we're not their moms.
Yeah, it's interesting because what I immediately thought of when you brought up motherhood is that I do feel like I'm learning things from my kids now. And I don't mean like learning how to use ChatGPT, although like that too. I mean, like, I think that because they've grown up with social media, they also are very aware of its limitations and its dangers. And, in some ways are very good at like understanding the importance of putting it down. I also think that they are, I'm generalizing about all kids, but like my daughter is 22 and she understands more about like how she thinks and how she relates to people than I think I did at that age. And sometimes even, than I do now as like this, Gen X, like get it done, as we've discussed, like alpha kind of person. I think she approaches things with a more sort of like thoughtful, like, why do you do that? Let's talk about why you do that. She's also like, been in therapy, which is like a great and rewarding part of her life, which I think a lot of younger people kind of see in a way that like,
well, it's so much more
our
accepted.
Generation didn't. Yeah, it's much more accepted, and that's good. So I do think there are things that like we can learn from that. As far as like the sort of guardrails around how do you not let your life be sort of hijacked by forces of technology that are ultimately propelled by people who, don't really have your best interests in mind and, are largely still unregulated. I think it's just being aware of that. I think that's the biggest tool that we can have right now, other than, the very obvious things of like, have moments and ideally days and maybe even weeks where you are like putting it away, where you are off the phone, where you are really like forcing yourself just the way you might force yourself to exercise or to eat healthy. You're forcing yourself to like be offline. I think that's important.
One thing that sort of strikes me is that you were in a position, and you still are with the Meteor, where you're telling stories and sort of communicating out to the world, right? And maybe it's a little bit more interactive now than it was when we started. There was Lean In. There was all kinds of advice. Everyone's always giving, not just women, but people in general, about how to manage their career to try and get satisfaction or happiness or whatever the thing is today. What's the thing that sort of strikes you now with kind of this perspective that you have? Because I agree, like as a mom of a 25 and a 26-year-old who, teach me about boundaries, something, when I slept under the desk, like I was like, that's normal. That's how you move forward in a
totally.
job. What is like the thing that sort of strikes you that we should...
Did you really sleep under a desk?
Oh, I definitely had those jobs. I worked in investment banking. I worked as a paralegal. I never thought anything of it, but I was like, that's what you do.
Right.
But I was resilient. So, I was like, okay, you do what you got to do.
Right.
So we're not going to do my therapy. We're going to come back to what is the thing that we think, with the perspective that we have from the younger generation and the experience that we've had, that you think we should like leave other people with that will help them?
Oh my God, that's such a huge question. Did you just
I
ask me
know,
what's the meaning of
Could
life?
you solve the world's problems?
I mean, I think everything is more fun when you do it with somebody else. I think that's like a really, really important thing. And again, AI is going to, it's probably going to be like evolved hugely by the time this podcast even comes out. Like that's how fast
100%.
things are changing. But, all of that really prompts us to be insular. And I think everything like work or, friendships or just like the act of being human, like we are made to be with other
humans.
people. And so I think just, again, women were always taught to be competitive in the workplace. Took me a long time to understand that like collaboration makes everything better, even if it is hard sometimes to get over your like, I got this mentality. But I think it's always worth doing because it just makes everything better.
You have to prioritize joy. Like it's actually okay to have joy.
Yeah.
It's not just accomplishment. You can also have joy.
Totally. Yes.
Because, I hope we learned that.
Sorry, that
COVID.
also. Plus joy.
Plus joy. Okay. So let's do rapid fire.
Okay.
Favorite karaoke song or walk-on music?
I always used to do for walk-on music. This is highly random. God Put a Smile on Your Face by Mark Ronson. Just a great.
I'm going to have to go listen to that.
Yeah. I really recommend it. Great walk-on music.
Okay. What are you reading, watching, or listening to?
I'm watching Hacks right now. I know I'm so basic. It's like that is
Love that show. Oh my God, does that make us basic?
No, it's not basic. It's more just like it is a show that everybody loves right now. So I'm not giving you an esoteric answer. I love it so much. And that relationship between Hannah Einbinder and Jean Smart is like there's nothing like that.
We might like the intergenerational story.
I love it. I love
too.
that. I love them both.
What is a food you'd bring to a potluck?
Oh, definitely my green chicken.
What's a green chicken?
I know it sounds kind of gross. It's like my go-to marinade / barbecue food. You just blenderize jalapeno, cilantro, garlic, and soy sauce. And then you let chicken pieces marinate in it for however long you want. If you want to do it for 24 hours, it'll be even better. And then it can go on the grill or you can do it in the oven. And it is like my foolproof recipe.
And you cook. That's what I've taken away.
I love cooking. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not like great.
I definitely don't cook, so I'd bring something store-bought.
No shame.
Okay. What is something that would surprise people about you?
I may have written about this, but I think most people probably don't know that I delivered a calf being
No, I did not know this about you.
On a farm in Ohio in my 20s. And I won't tell you any of the details, but it was like an extremely formative experience. It also involved a long plastic glove.
That seems also very messy.
Yeah.
Very messy.
Yeah. But I actually, do you know when I thought about it? I thought about it when I was in labor with my own kids because I was like, I feel like I'm going to die. But like the fact that I remembered this cow, like kind of what do cows do like when they're in pain? It's not mooing, it's lowing, I guess. Anyway, it was like
definitely another word I did not know.
But then like the calf came out, we got it out, and like 5 minutes later, the cow was like totally fine. And I was like, okay, this is something that the human body is built to do. It feels like I'm gonna die, but like, bajillions of people have felt like this, and many cows also all through life. Yes. Anyway, so that.
Okay. What's an alternative career you might have taken?
I had no alternative careers. I had no backups.
You had no plan B. I remember this about you.
No plan B. None. In retrospect, I think I would have been a really good lawyer because I like the details and I sometimes kind of like to argue.
Not baking or cooking.
I don't think I'm good enough. I just really enjoy it, but I don't know if I'd want to be like, kind of judged by it. Or like have to rise to a certain
I like the whole thing that we're being
standard.
judged by at all times. It's back to the glamour do's and don'ts. Let me ask you, what is one lesson we should leave everybody with as we part from this podcast?
Always wear your name tag on the right.
Oh, really? Why?
Ann Richards taught me that, former governor of Texas. I was her like escort during Glamour Women of the Year when I was like a baby editor, and she was Ann Richards, the governor of Texas. And I remember I had my name tag on the left and she said, always wear your name tag on the right. I have no idea if it's correct, but ever since then, I have always worn my name tag on the right. I don't know.
I would wear it on the right too.
I can't tell you why, but Ann Richards told me. I think, again, it's like, collaboration, like collaborate. Everything is more fun when you, and ultimately more successful when you can collaborate and, work with people you like. Like, that makes everything better. It's not always possible, but when it's possible,
makes a big difference.
It makes a big difference.
Well, thank you, Cindi, so much for coming on. Honestly, that was an amazing conversation. I could have asked you many, many other messy things.
Did we cover it all?
I don't think so.
Okay.
You might have to come back.
Okay.